Thank you all again for joining us tonight. I'm Megan Doherty, the director of the Museum of the White Mountains. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us tonight. As we gather today, we're all on indigenous lands. For those of you joining us from home, I encourage you to learn more about the indigenous presence in your area, both past and present. Those of us at the Museum of the White Mountains are on Indakina, which is the ancestral and present homelands of the Abnaki, Pennacook, and Wabnaki peoples. We're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. For those of you on Zoom, we'll put a link in the chat where you can learn more about the indigenous histories of your place at native-land.ca, as well as the Abnaki peoples of northern New England through the Musée des Abnakis in Quebec. And as part of my research for an exhibition this winter, I've been learning about efforts to preserve the culturally important brown ash tree, which is under threat from the emerald ash borer, as many of you know. So as we kick off our Mountain Voices series this year, focused on conservation in the White Mountains, I want to share a tiny bit about two projects that are looking for more folks to get involved with their work. The first is based at UMaine Orono. It's the Ash Protection Collaboration Across Wabnaki, or APCAW, and they're working with tribal nations to build a seed bank for brown ash. And the other is the Monitoring and Managing Ash Project, or MAMA. We've got a good snazzy acronym, project out of the Ecological Research Institute in Kingston, New York. And they're studying lingering ash, as potentially emerald ash borer resistant trees offer great hope for conserving the species. And both projects have many ways for volunteers to get involved. And for those of you on Zoom, we'll put the links in the chat. And I'd be happy to talk more with folks in person if you're interested in getting involved. To turn to tonight's topic, I'm thrilled to start off our series with a deep dive into the conservation of one very well-trodden section of the White Mountains, the Franconia Ridge. Our speaker tonight, Nat Scrimshaw, has a long history as an active steward of trails in the White Mountains and is active as well in global efforts. He is currently chair of the Pan American Trails and the World Trails Network Hub for the Americas. The World Trails Network, if you're not familiar with it, is a global nonprofit association committed to the sustainability and enjoyment of the world's trails for all people through an engaged international network of organizations and individuals. And please join me in welcoming Nat.
That says is a tale of two trails. Franconia Ridge, a tale of two trails. That's something that will be the theme throughout this presentation. So, does anybody notice anything about that photo of Franconia Ridge? First of all, let me ask a question. Who here has hiked Franconia Ridge? Stephen, you haven't hiked Franconia Ridge? Oh, we've got to get you up there. Has anybody hiked it this year? Okay, few of you. So this is the view that's coming off of Lafayette, looking towards Lincoln. And is there anything that you notice about that photo?
Yeah. Nobody on the trail.
That's it. Quite a few people off the trail. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a little fuzzy there out of 10 people, which is a little discouraging to me. This was Monday. This was just a few days ago, which was the last time I was up on Franconia Ridge. And we'll be talking more about what the implications are of off-trail walking like that. All right, what am I not pressing right here?
The right-hand arrow.
What am I not pointing at?
Oh no, we had it working a second ago.
Well, it's probably me because I always do things.
No, I don't know.
Oh,
I think not. Try now.
There we go. So a brief introduction. I have been the adopter on Franconia Ridge Trail and call myself a West End trail tender. Since 2005, so next year will be my 20th year as the adopter on Franconia Ridge. I'm chair of the World Trails Network Hub for the Americas and Pan American Trails. This is not the subject of this presentation, but I'm happy to talk to people about that organization. And I'm co-chair of the Trails and Sustainability International Task Team, and that's probably more relevant because I serve on that task team with a number of the world's best recreational ecologists. I also have worked on trails in two places in the world a lot. One in here in New Hampshire on Franconia Ridge on the left, and on the right is in Costa Rica, where I've been working on a trail project also for about 20 years called the Sendero Pacifico. So the West End Trail Tenders, for those who don't know, it's what Laura and Guy Waterman, who were the first adopters on Franconia Ridge in 1980 when the Adopt a Trail program first was created by the Forest Service and the AMC. They called themselves and all of the other adopters that were in the trails close by the West End Trail Tenders. And instead of just working on the trail alone as adopters, they would come together with other trail adopters on the nearby trails, whether it was the Old Bridle Path or the Falling Waters or the Garfield Ridge Trail, and they'd work together on the trails. So they'd share trail work, and that was the West End Trail Tenders. They're also good friends, including being willing to take care of my dog, Elsa, who was there in the photo, when I moved to Costa Rica in the early 1990s. For many years, I would work with Guy. He would help train the trail crews that I led in the 1980s and 1990s. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that spot in what we call the gargoyles on Franconia Ridge, but one of Guy's favorite pastimes was jumping back and forth and scaring everybody going out on that rock. Trail work is also a family affair. It's something that I've been doing with my children and my family. There is Clara, my daughter, who's right there. You know, she's visiting here right now. And that was 1995. She was 7 years old, and I was teaching her how to move a rock. And Andy, no, we're not wearing helmets. Sorry about that. And then there we are, nearly 25 years later, 2019, still moving rocks up on Franconia Ridge. On the left here, there's Clara and my wife Jenny, and Jenny is also here. Jenny is a West End Trail Tender and often comes up and works. This was an early, on the left there was early this year, cleaning drainage up on the Upper Greenleaf Trail. And on the right is a few years ago with Clara and then my son, Benjamin. And speaking of Benjamin, I'm going to go back in time a little bit, be a Benjamin Button here. So in my family, we go back a little bit more. On the left is my great uncle Nat and my grandfather Hubert next. And then there's Hubert and my grandmother and mother and great and uncle in 1930 on the far right. Nat Goodrich was one of the original 4 trail masters of the AMC. And I derive a lot of my inspiration from his work. His father was Arthur Goodrich. We have some Waterville Valley historical people here. The Waterville, Arthur Goodrich did the first maps of Waterville Valley and built many of the trails, or worked on many of the trails in Waterville in the mid to late 19th century, early 20th century. And for those of you who don't know, Waterville was a hiking center, really starting in the 1820s. It's considered to be where the first recreational trail system in the United States was developed. Now that means a trail system being a place where you could visit specifically to go hiking, and there was a trail network that surrounded the inn that was there. I say recreational trail system, and this is also thinking about indigenous people, because obviously there were trails here before. There have been trails here for thousands of years. I just had an interesting meeting where we were discussing this with people from the Taiwan 1,000-Mile Trail Association, realizing that the distinction between trails and roads and transportation, because initially trails were hunting and they were transport systems. So recreational trails is sort of a new category for us. But the tale of two trails I'm talking about today, I gave you the background of why I'm kind of fanatical about trails, my history. But the tale of two trails is really a tale of four trails. So the Franconia Ridge Loop consists of the Old Bridle Path, the Upper Greenleaf Trail. For those of you who don't know, the Greenleaf Trail goes between a parking area near the Cannon ski area to Greenleaf Hut, and then has an upper section that goes from Greenleaf Hut to Lafayette. So the Loop Trail actually uses the Old Bridle Path to get to Greenleaf Hut, and then the Upper Greenleaf Trail to get to Lafayette, and then continues on the Franconia Ridge Trail section, Lafayette to Little Haystack, down Little Haystack and the Falling Waters Trail. And I just did it in reverse of what people usually do. People usually do up the Falling Waters, across the ridge, down the Upper Greenleaf Trail to the Old Bridle Path. So these are four trails, but they're also trails within the context of other trails. You'll see in the Franconia Ridge planning process, we designated secondary trails, which you can see in pink on the map to the right. But what's important to see on this map is that the hatch line trails that you see, the Upper Greenleaf and then the Franconia Ridge, Lafayette to Little Haystack, is in the alpine zone. And then the Old Bridle Path and Falling Waters is largely outside of the alpine zone. The two trail story, one of them at least that I'm telling you today, is the story of a trail which now is an example of some of the best work you can see in the White Mountain National Forest and in the New Hampshire State Parks. At least that's my opinion. Maybe Andy, who works for the state parks, might know of some other work that's of high quality like this, but this is really some of the best work. And also, it's one of the most deteriorated trails that you'll find in the White Mountains. So there's two sides to the Franconia Ridge. And part of what I want to talk to you about is not just the work that's being done and the incredible example of very high quality trail work, but also how we got there and what are some of the continuing problems we may have in the future. I'm quite concerned that if we don't address the trail maintenance issue, that much of the good work that we're doing now, we will lose in the future. So one of my concerns is thinking and understanding how did the trail get so bad? One of the reasons that it's so good has to do with the fact that there's a lot of money that's come in. And so we're able to do a major trail restoration project. Starting last year, and thanks to Senator Jean Shaheen, there's a $1.125 million available for trail work on the loop trails over 5 years. And this is for federal land. And for those of you who don't know the trail isn't just on federal land. It's not just in the national forest. It's also in the Franconia Notch State Park. So one of the concerns that we had when we realized that all this money was coming in, but it was leaving out some very important sections and some very deteriorated sections of trails is could we possibly get some more funding? And thankfully, the World Trails Network Hub for the Americas, Pan American Trails, was able to get a donation of nearly $300,000. It's actually $292,000, and for over 2 years. And so we're able to contribute to the Loop Trail project and essentially finish it by working on the state parks section. The partnership that we now have, we're calling the Partnership to Restore the Franconia Ridge Loop, includes the major partners are the Forest Service and the AMC, New Hampshire State Parks, and the World Trails Network Hub for the Americas. But there are other partners. There are contractors and actually many volunteers who are working on the trail. So this is why we're able to do some of the really high quality trail work, because we have the funds to do it. Okay, so why do we find the conditions so bad on Franconia Ridge? What has contributed? And I'm going to list a few things. And the first that's really important to understand are just the numbers of people who are hiking the trail. I don't have graphs here that shows the increase in numbers. There was a spike during the COVID years. It's gone down a little bit. But in general, what I've witnessed and experienced is a steady growth in the number of hikers on Franconia Ridge, as well as other trails. This is an example of a Labor Day weekend up on Lafayette. And there were over 100 people clustered up on top of that mountain that day. The second reason that I think is a major reason is drainage isn't being cleaned. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of drainage for controlling erosion. But many of the trails in the White Mountains are what are called fall line trails. They go straight up the mountain. They have often hundreds of water bars. And each of those water bars, in order to function, they're shunting the water off to help control erosion. They need to be cleaned, often, a couple times a year. With the more intense rain events that we're getting now with climate change, this issue is exacerbated. This is actually not the one photo on the right. It's actually the lower Greenleaf Trail. I just used it because it's just such a good example of a completely useless and full water bar. But the water bars on the Falling Waters Trail and Old Bridle Path are similar. Some of them have not been adequately cleaned in over a decade. Another has to do with design, and when I say this, I don't want to be overly critical of the trail builders who built these stairs, but what has happened, what the design system that developed in the 1960s and 70s, the style of having single tread, large rock steps, often the steps quite high, what we call power steps, with large rocks on the side that are called gargoyle, single tread. These two things happen with these. First of all, when you have the potentially 1,000 people crossing Franconia Ridge and a cluster of 50 or 60 people in a line, they don't stay on a single tread. So they start going around. And also with the stairs, if they're too high, people will go around. So you simply can't have stairs with a trail that is heavily traveled, as the Franconia Ridge Loop is a single tread like that. On the right is a slightly different issue. If you notice that that trekking pole is showing that it's almost 2 feet height, and the original step was a little more reasonable, probably 12 inches or so. But what happens is, as the water bar above that step was never cleaned, and so the water comes down and it comes off of that step like a waterfall, and then just gouges out. And so this just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. This is a design issue that actually can be solved during the construction period if you put a foundation step in. In other words, there should be a step that's buried up to the ground, so when the water comes off of that rock, it hits the rock and doesn't have that erosive power. Another is shoulder season hiking. People may be familiar with the term monorail. This is when the snow gets hard packed. People hike in the snow, and it gets hard packed, and then they walk to as it melts in the spring. They don't want to walk on this little pyramid of snow in the middle of the trail till they walk to the side. The example on the right shows what a little bit later in the spring, the damage that you have in the alpine zone with this phenomenon of the shoulder season hiking and the monorails. And then another is group size. Even if you don't have a lot of people hiking Franconia Ridge, if you have a group of 30 people, and they meet another group of 30 people, all of a sudden you've got 60 people all clustered in one area. There is no group size limit in the alpine zone. There is a group size limit of 10 in wilderness areas in the White Mountain National Forest, but nothing in the alpine zone. All right, so I do want to spend some time, and this may be a little, hopefully your eyes won't glaze over, really talking about why this happens. What's happening here in terms of the soil and the geology here. This is a very simple soil profile that I actually pulled out of an AMC guide, trail manual. And what you can see here is a very simple profile of looking at bedrock, some layer of subsoil, some layer of organic soil. It's a living soil. There are microorganisms in that, and then surface litter. I actually made it a little more complicated. I took it and added some vegetation on top, and also some roots, because this is what we find a lot of in our organic layer, as well as threw some rocks into the subsoil. And this is important because this is what our trails are like. We find big boulders and rocks and lots of roots. So what happens over time? Well, the first is you start walking on a trail. The first thing that happens is you kill the vegetation. The vegetation starts to disappear. Then you have a little bit of compaction. A little bit of erosion. Eventually you hit the roots and expose the roots, and the soil can be quite compacted between the roots. Then you start undermining the roots, and you're really starting to hit the subsoil, and the rocks are starting to pop in. The roots start to break, or they sometimes get cut by trail makers. And then eventually you start having, very quickly, you can have rapid erosion, and what's left are the rocks and the boulders and subsoil. And obviously this can increase and get to the point, and you've probably seen it, where it gets to right down to the bedrock. So this is the progression. This is what happens. When you get to the point where you've lost your organic layer, because what you have to imagine is that the organic layer is like a giant sponge. So the water comes down and it rains and it percolates and it flows through this wonderful layer of duff. As long as you have that, water is going to distribute itself through the landscape and go to the natural drainages. But once you get to the subsoil, the water is going to percolate through and it's going to hit that subsoil, and it's going to start running down your trail like a river. So your trail essentially becomes an artificial river. So this is what we have. So the purpose of putting in the water bars is to, simple formula, the harder a surface is, the faster the water will run down it. You know, if you have pavement, you can imagine it goes really fast. And the faster the water is running, the more erosive power it has. So if you want to reduce the erosive impact of water, you shunt it off every once in a while. And that's what the purpose of water bars are and other drainages, is to get the water off the trail before it accelerates and you know, its velocity increases. So it has, you know, a huge erosive power. It's going to be worth taking a minute to look at this, because this is the other idea that I want you to take away today, which is the asymptotic relationship between visitor use or use and environmental impact. And what does that mean? So the curve that's above is called a sigmoidal curve. And what you're seeing here is that the impact increases as use increases, but it doesn't increase in a straight line. It actually very slowly starts to climb to a point before you start having a exponential growth in impact. And then it levels off. Why do you guys think it levels off?
Everything's gone.
It's gone. Yeah, there's nothing, there's not much, you can't destroy anything more. So you can virtually put, continue on forever, increasing the amount of use in theory. But this is really important because you have these different parts of this curve are really critical. Because this is a diagram that's looking at camping, but this could be applied to trails too. So if you're on the lower end of the sigmoidal curve with a low level of use, you can potentially, you don't have to build water bars. You can maintain a nice spongy, soil. And as a matter of fact, there are many trails that I hike on in the White Mountains and the Sandwich Range that have so little use that they're fall line trails and they go right up, but they don't have a huge amount of erosion. But it doesn't take very much before you hit that exponential growth. And the idea of containment here for camping is you say, okay, you designate camping areas, whole areas destroyed, make people camp there, you contain the impact. The trails are essentially the same thing. You're just trying to contain the people within this area so that there's no more impact. So, here is another way of looking at it. So you can see that if you can have this low level of use, you maintain that nice organic layer. You get the exponential growth and then eventually levels off at this very high impact. I just decided to take a walk before a couple of days before I came here and took a few photos. And this is an example of some trails. So here you can see you're just starting to have this is actually what we call a bootleg trail. It's not, it's an informal trail in the forest but people are using it regularly enough that the vegetation is starting to die and you can follow it. But that trail continues to have a good organic layer and be absorbent. Okay, here we're getting a little bit more of an impact. You're starting to have some compaction. There's actually a little bit of what Andy was just calling, what were you calling it? Not granola, you were calling it kitty litter. Yeah, I can see a little bit of kitty litter, a little bit of granular broken up granite there. And then here is an example of getting to the point where you're getting root exposure, compaction. The water starts running pretty fast down these trails. It is getting blocked by the roots. And then, of course, eventually you get to this. And this is a photo of the old bridle path. And in the New Hampshire State Park sections, what we're working on. And by the way, Andy here, who I'm referring to, works for New Hampshire State Parks with us. So this is just a little bit of an example. Now, what do we do about this? One of the big problems has to do with, I've mentioned a couple times this idea of fall line trails, of trails that go straight up the mountain. Fall line trails have a number of characteristics. First of all, the water tends to run straight down them. And the way that you can deal with that from a trail maintenance point of view is to build a lot of steps and a lot of water bars, and it works. It can work. It's a lot of, costs a bit of money, but it works. There is a problem though, and that problem is that fall line trails, you've got to clean those water bars. And what I just showed you a photo of is the fact that our water bars are not getting cleaned in the White Mountains, many of them, most of them. So one alternative is, instead of building the trails straight up the mountains, is to build what are called side hill trails. And this gets to the concept of the role of trail slope alignment in good trail design. This is Peter Jensen. He's working on the old bridle path. He's looking at the slope of the trail, determining exactly where he wants to put steps. This is actually a completed section, and this shows a side hill trail. And the thing to keep in mind is that the water is actually also constantly getting shunted off because of a down slope angle to the tread. Another thing that's currently recommended by the professional trail builders in the United States is something called grade reversals instead of water bars. So what a grade reversal is you think of what you see when you have a water bar, is you might have a rock or an earth berm or a log, and the water comes and actually comes close to hitting it. It usually doesn't, because you try to create a nice little dip in front. But as I said before, that constantly is filling up with silt. So it constantly has to be cleaned. A grade reversal is if you imagine your side hill trail is going along, gradually climbing, and then you do a little bit of a dip and then go back up. So you reverse the grade. And what that means is that you can create a drainage that almost doesn't require any cleaning. It depends on how it's constructed. It's almost just part of the natural landscape with the water draining off. That combined, if you really keep a nice good angle to your downslope tread, you're able to have a trail that drains itself and doesn't require cleaning. So one of the things we're trying to do on the section of trail that we're working on, the World Trails Network is working on, is to, where possible, never build a water bar, but only do the grade reversals. And I'm happy to say that the work that we did this year, there is not a single water bar. They're all grade reversals. Oops, let's go the other way. Another important piece is, and a role in the widening of trails, is something called trail rugosity, and that just means the roughness, or how rough the trail is. And there's two things that contribute to trail rugosity in the White Mountains. One is the the rocks that you can see popping up out of the ground. This is also an old staircase that's gotten undermined, and people would rather walk around it than walk up it. But also the roots get exposed, and people will avoid the roots. There's a phenomenon that I call trail creep, which is you'll see a trail, people will walk along a trail, the roots will get exposed, that will make them feel a little uncomfortable, they'll walk on the duff next to it, the roots will get exposed, and then so on until the trail just drifts down the mountain. You see quite a lot of that on the Welch mountain trail going up to the first ledges.
That's not the same place.
It isn't, I'm sorry. I just used this as an example. We have not worked on that. Actually, that is not going to be worked on. We're gonna reroute the trail so it's a side hill trail. And this is also not the same location. But I wanted to, the one on the left is on the Falling Waters Trail. But what I wanted to just indicate here is that one thing that we absolutely need to do in a trail that is used as much and has the kind of traffic that the Falling Waters and Old Bridle Path and the whole loop has is we have to widen the trail. Otherwise, people will go around the trail work. All right, so I've just mentioned, been talking about the work on the approach trails, what will be the Falling Waters. All the work we've been doing so far is on the Old Bridle Path. But what I want to spend some time on now is the alpine zone, because it's a special case and the stakes are really, really high. Again, this is an example of a sunny Saturday up on Lafayette. A few things to understand about the Franconia Ridge alpine zone. It's a ribbon of alpine area. And that's important because of the trail to alpine area ratio and the edge to alpine area ratio. There's a lot of edge, there's a lot of trail, and the trail is right, basically very close often to the edge of the alpine zone. So in a ribbon environment like the Franconia Ridge, the trail is potentially has a huge impact. Just look at that. I mean, essentially, you've got the alpine zone is just on either side of the trail. This is different than Mount Washington, which has it has more trails, but there's a lot more, area of alpine zone, and the trails don't have as much an effect on that area of alpine zone. So this is something we really have to take in consideration. One of the reasons the Forest Service is interested in having us work on the Crawford Path in the future is because the Crawford Path leads to that big, island of alpine area. But it's also a ribbon, and it has similar characteristics to the Franconia Ridge. And so the Forest Service is interested in having us take our work and bring it to the Crawford Path in the future. All right, getting back to Franconia Ridge, we already talked about the off trail in this picture. Let's talk about what we're doing to try to improve conditions on Franconia Ridge. First of all, historically, part of what happened, as I said, in the 1950s and 60s, is we moved from, let's imagine a sequence of time. So the trails in the 1890s, largely, there were some high impact bridle paths, but largely they were footpaths that were highly sustainable because they just didn't get much use. Going into the early 20th century, then we had the Depression, gas rationing during World War II. It was very difficult to get up here. The trails were very low use. After World War II, there was a boom and people started coming and recreating. And essentially, we've had, since World War II, an increase in the numbers of people, and until now, we've had a huge, huge increase. This is when the AMC and other trail groups across the country started to develop techniques like the rock work. And on Franconia Ridge, the specific innovation was scree walls, these low walls. So in 1977, after inventorying the whole ridge, the AMC built the scree walls. And you can see on the left in 1975, without the scree walls, essentially people were going all over the ridge. There were multiple herd paths up on Franconia Ridge. And then this is 1993, a photo by Charlie Cogbill. You can see the trail, the steps and the scree walls have worn down a bit, but they're still quite intact. This is just this year, the same area. I just want to show you that, see that rock that's on the upper right? This is our reference rock, and you can see it right there too. So this is the same general area. This is what's happening over time is what I call is the trail becoming catawampus, which is just, the rock starts shifting, it starts losing its quality of actually looking like a trail. And then you start to see this same phenomenon of what were rock steps become rock obstacles. It's the rugosity issue. And I can see in this photo, there's trails that are developing on either side here. This is the photo that, from just a few days ago, and you can see the people who are off trail in this same area. This is coming up, and they were actually picnicking on the side there. And then as I came up and started talking to them, they came off the trail. But you can also see a little bit of that side trail. The issue for the alpine zone is that if you remember that sigmoidal, that curve, is that if we can keep people on the trail, then we're up on that top right there, and that's okay. But as soon as people go off, we're entering back into, we're creating this kind of double sigmoidal thing. We're getting this impact again, only it's on either side of the trail. And the stakes are high. This is an area that really deteriorated rapidly back in 2018, where within a space of a few weeks, I saw this go from a diapensia mound that was probably maybe 50, 60 years old, to having 3/4 of it trampled because people were stepping to get onto that rock in order to take photos or get photos of themselves taken. This can happen in a matter of days. And these plants take decades to grow. So again, the numbers game here, just to give you a little sense. This is just June through, what is that? That's August. But what you can see is that you're spiking, over 700 and 800 and approaching 1,000. This particular year, there were 1,200 people and on the Labor Day weekend. So this is the pattern that we have. But that's not the most important part of it. It's not it's not that there are 1,000 people. It's that the people cross the ridge in a wave. They come and they park and between 7 and 9 or 10, and then they hike the ridge in a bubble. And what we find is that between when you reach a point of maybe over 140 people passing per hour, you start to get what I call the chaos on the ridge. Almost nothing we can do, whether it's alpine stewards or scree walls or signage, tends to work. So what we did back in 2018 is we put together a partnership that keeps getting bigger and expanding. It started out with the Appalachian Mountain Club and the Forest Service and the Waterman Fund and the ATC. We now are working with different universities like Binghamton and WPI, and you know now about our new partnership. Now, they're not directly working on the Ridge, New Hampshire State Parks, but in terms of the larger project of caring for the loop. And what we're focusing on is an approach that I call integrated trail management. And what it is it's not that complicated idea. Direct management of trails involves actually working on the trail, building scree walls, doing tread improvements. It can be rebuilding steps, includes things like string fencing. It also includes regulations. So if there was ever a group size limit, that's a direct management approach. Then the indirect management is different ways of communicating, education. We have alpine and summit stewards and trailhead stewards that the Forest Service has. There's the hut naturalist, there's signage. So it's combining the direct management of the trail with indirect management. And this is an integrated trail management system, which is more than the sum of the parts. That's why we call it synergistic, because by itself, direct management works. By itself, indirect management works, maybe not quite as well as direct management, but together you get the best result. We put together a new program, which we're calling the Northeast Alpine Stewardship Center, where we're working and coordinating with other organizations across the Northeast and New York and Vermont and Maine, and even hoping eventually to get up to Quebec in the Chic-Choc Mountains and work with Canadians. Part of the program that we have is to have summit stewards up on the ridge, the paid college interns, hiring a chief summit steward. We just developed a 5-week academic semester program, and we've been funding trail work, which is the work we're doing on the old bridle path right now with New Hampshire State Parks. And we have an international fellowship program. I want to just mention a few things about our academic program. It's in part built around the books that the Waterman books, history of environmental history of Northeast mountains with Forest and Craig, and then wilderness ethics and the Green Guide to Low Impact Hiking, which I call Backwoods Ethics because that's what its original name was. Our curriculum includes, as I said, a history of the Northeast recreational trails, fundamentals of recreation ecology. We can have wilderness first aid thrown in there, leave no trace, trail design and construction, introduction to geographic information systems, and most importantly, teaching integrated trail management. I'm not expecting you to read this, but this is just an indication. We have a seminar series. These were some of our speakers this year. All of these were on Zoom, so they're actually open to anybody that is interested. And we were able to get, because of the World Trails Network, connections, people all over the world, ranging from Hungary and all the way to Taiwan, and then Peru and Bolivia and Brazil. And then less formally, each week we come together in what we call fireside chats, and have sort of an open seminar, and we invite volunteers and Forest Service staff and anybody who wants to come along. Not going to go into read all this list of the direct and indirect trail management, but this is what we actually do on the ridge. It does include doing monitoring and supporting research. It's always the work of rebuilding the scree walls and rebuilding cairns and scree walls. I wanted to give a shout out to the AMC because this is not work that's done by on the left on either side here. This is an AMC. They just completed this work, rebuilding those cairns and that scree wall. It's just excellent work. Again, the cairns, work on building cairns. Got to clean that drainage. What's not happening on other trails, we want to make sure happens on the ridge. Putting brush obstacles in order to discourage people from hiking in trampled areas. One reason that people don't hike sections of the trail is because they get buried in rubble every year, and so we have to clean the rubble off. One of the innovations of the Watermans was to build these pullouts up on the ridge so that as the crowds increase, there's places where people can rest and have, you know, an opportunity to get off the trail without getting onto vegetation. It's a little bit of a sacrifice area, but it's an incredibly good technique. So we have to constantly maintain those. And we do things like rebuild steps every once in a while. You know, this catawampus situation that we have with the money that we have. Hopefully there'll be trail crews that can come up and do more work, but we're constantly also doing repair on the trail. This is actually the picture earlier of Clara and I working. Yeah, we did this little rebuild. Always education while we're up there, always communicating and talking to people. Through a partnership with the AMC, our summit stewards do a once a week, or have done in the past, a once a week presentation with the hut naturalists. We've developed signage that we're constantly adapting and maintaining and bringing up. These are 3 different sign sizes that we have. The MIDI or medium-sized kiosk, that's an approach kiosk by the Shining Rock Trail, where we have information on the alpine zone and safety and ecology. What we call these micro kiosks. So there was that area that I mentioned that had the severe trampling, and we put this little micro kiosk in, which has been enormously successful and has helped to lead to revegetation. String fencing, which doesn't look very attractive, but it sure works. This is an area that approached a little haystack, which was just absolute gravel, because as soon as everybody was reaching the alpine zone, they were fanning out. This is what it looks like now. This is mountain sandwort, which often comes in. It's a first successional alpine plant that grows in disturbed areas. We also have a sign there. So between the sign and the string fencing and an additional summit steward, we've had a huge change there. We're mapping the revegetation areas with a platform that's called Restore. We're just started photo point monitoring. That's actually Welch Mountain, but we are doing this as well up on Franconia Ridge. This is a way that we can take photos and monitor the change, either positive or negative revegetation or more loss of vegetation in areas, and see how different strategies we're using are working. With the student interns that we have each one has a project. This is just a few examples from the last couple of years of one of our interns created a structure from motion, 3-dimensional model of the ridge, and then used that for his capstone honors thesis in graduating. Another intern did picked up every piece of trash she saw and documented it, and actually geo-referenced it all, so we're able to see where the hot spots for trash are. We've been linking with other alpine stewards and summit stewards and caretakers from the Green Mountains and Adirondacks, as well as the Bruce Trail in Canada. And I think there's even someone from Costa Rica on that Zoom call. We've also been doing field trips. This is on the right is a field trip with alpine stewards from the Mount Moosilauke and the Dartmouth Outing Club. And on the left is Green Mountains. And I think you might recognize we have an audience member in that photo. There's Miles when he was working as a summit steward. We also have this International Trail Fellowship where we have professionals from around the world. This is a colleague, András from Hungary, who is actually a mathematician, and he's analyzed the trail systems using graph theory, looking at how people flow through trail systems. And this is a comparison of Mount Mansfield and Franconia Ridge. This year, our two International Trails Fellows were from Paraguay and Bolivia. I do want to mention that we're funded, and these fellowships are in memory of a dear colleague, Natasha Luskova, who died of COVID in 2021. And this is part of a larger project we have to have these centers that are built on partnerships, trail centers throughout the Americas. And this is this larger project of the Pan American Trails. And currently we have in the Northeast Alpine Stewardship Center. We have one in Mesoamerica and Costa Rica. And then our newest one is in Brazil. And in case anybody wants to go to Brazil, we've got a trip coming up, international. We also sponsor international expeditions, volunteer trail work. I want to close this presentation. Do I have 2 more minutes to keep going? By getting you to think a little bit. And what I've described to you and what I've tried to convey to you is a little bit how trails change over time, how that's related to use and impact. And in the particular case of Franconia Ridge, this is how I see the history in terms of impact. So before the 1950s, before the post-World War II boom in hiking, the use was so low that we were, essentially, in this period of sustainable trail as it is, without additional work. What we started happening in the really the 50s into the 70s and intensifying in the 80s was this accelerated, this exponential growth and impact. And that's when the AMC intervened with the Forest Service and created the scree walls and built new cairns and steps and water bars up on Franconia Ridge. And that actually worked. That contained people until it didn't. And until the use increased enough that set of strategies failed. So starting in really I should say 2018 there, we started the integrated trail system, and we were able to again, bring it back down. We're able to contain it. And that's almost where we are now. I would say that the strategies that we're using with the summit stewards and this integrated trail management approach is largely working, except sometimes it doesn't. And just the last thing to say is that there are times when this wave reaches a point where the containment fails, where all of the strategies that we use don't work anymore. We can't, and the only thing that seems to really keep people in is string fencing. Maybe if we string fence the whole thing, we could do it. But there is a point, there still probably is a threshold, and this is one of the things that we need to think about. The other thing I want to say, and this is a more general comment, whatever we're doing in the White Mountains on the high use trails isn't working. We are not cleaning our drainage. It's leading to situations like that, undercutting of that step that you're seeing there. And we have the shoulder season hiking. We have policies that, unlike Vermont, which has very strong ethic around restraining hiking on certain trails during mud season. We don't have that culture in New Hampshire, and it shows. We need some new systems. We're going to continue to lose trails. And one of the concerns that I have with the work that we're doing on the Franconia Loop Trail, and I'm curious to see what people think, is that we're going to lose the trail again. I mean, I know the trail is in much better. I mean, if it could all be side hill trails, that would be great, but it can't be. We're rebuilding a lot of the trail in the same location, building water bars. Those water bars are already not being cleaned, and potentially we're going to have the same situation. I think we need to rethink the way that we work on trails. I'm going to skip this slide and just go to the end here. I think part of what is a new paradigm for trail work. I think one of the problems is that the White Mountains has become dependent on individual adopters on certain high-use trails like the Franconia Ridge Trail, which I'm the adopter of, or the Old Bridle Path, or the Falling Waters, or maybe having a couple people maintaining those trails. There is no way that a single person can do that trail. I cannot take care of the Franconia Ridge Trail by myself. The only reason that things are at all, improving on Franconia Ridge is because I developed a program that has summit stewards and bringing in lots of people. We need to somehow figure out how to. I think the dependency on individual adopters has created a crisis on many trails. And I'd like to see us go back to what we used to do in the old trail clubs, which is to work on trails together. I think this is an example of one of the trail days. I think there's Andy in that picture. Yeah, that we did with the AMC on the Old Bridle Path, and the energy and enthusiasm of people working together, and the amount of work you can do in a crew. I think this is the tradition of the old clubs. We need to figure out ways that we can, in the modern era with social media and using all the new techniques, and maybe people don't join clubs because they don't want to join clubs, but people do like to work together. And we need to somehow recreate that spirit and that energy if we're going to be able to make sure that the Franconia Ridge Loop Trail and other trails in the White Mountains don't deteriorate again, even after we've invested $1.5 million in infrastructure. So that's I've gone a little over here, sorry.
Thank you. One question in the chat, and I'm going to go back, I think, to your slide here, because I think that maybe you're going to want this slide to answer the question.
Sure.
So it was a comment and a question. The comment was about how, for this person who I happen to know is very knowledgeable about the history of the White Mountains, she didn't have a sense of how much work went into the maintenance. And thanks you for telling her about it and for that. And then the question is, do you think, or would you recommend that we go to a system with a cap on, a sort of limits, group size or daily traffic, or what would you suggest? Which is why I put us back to this chart. I thought it might help.
Okay. Yeah, you've just this is opening up the kettle of worms.
Well,
yeah.
You were skirting around it in your comments. So
I actually think this would be a great thing for us to discuss, but I will say this. Let me just, so I'm part of a group that's called the Franconia Ridge Working Group that includes representatives from the AMC and the Forest Service and state parks and search and rescue and fishing game and lots of other people. And we've been working for years trying to create a visitor use management plan. And the question always arises, well, do we start limiting access? And the fact is that if we really, that would be an effective way to reduce impact on the alpine zone. And I do think that given what I experience and see on Franconia Ridge, that we do need to try to limit the height of this wave. Okay, but what I want to say is there are different ways you can do that. And having some kind of limited access or permit system is one way to do it, to administratively do it. But I want to share with you another way that's not quite as well. It's just a different strategy. During the pandemic, you probably all know there's a shuttle system, right? Currently, so we got people off of the highway, and they can park at which is the parking lot they park at now, 34C. Yeah, up by the base lodge. So once the old bridle path parking lot is full, they can park there and then get shuttled to the trailhead. And that is effectively almost meant that the number of people going up Franconia Ridge is, it's not limitless because that's a pretty big parking area. So it's really increased the pressure on the ridge. During the pandemic, the shuttle didn't run, but people still weren't allowed to park on the highway. And so instead, people were parking in actually the Cannon parking lot, and then they were asked to walk on the bike path to the old bridle path, do the loop, and then potentially go down the Greenleaf Trail instead of the old bridle path, a little bit of a longer loop. But what it meant was that the parking lot filled up at the old bridle path, and then they would park in this other area, and it took them some time to get back to the old bridle path, which meant there were two bubbles, right? And that was actually better for us up on the ridge because the peaks were lower, so you didn't have that concentration of people. So I'm just simply saying that that's one way that you could change the way that people flow across the ridge would be how you shuttle people or don't shuttle people, how you manage the parking. I do think that we need to limit access, but there.
I was wondering whether it would work to get permits like they do out in the High Sierra, or whether that would not be feasible because we have too many ways to access the White Mountains.
So the question for folks on Zoom is whether a permit system like they have in the High Sierras might work here, or whether the kind of innumerable access points would make that difficult.
Well, I think you've hit on the key problem with any permit system in the White Mountains is that it's not like you're in a national park where, that might have a controlled access coming in. You have people coming in from all sides. So from that point of view, there are, some real challenges. I don't know, Miles works for the Forest Service, and he's on a group that is actually talking about this, aren't you? What?
Miles says he does not represent the Forest Service. He's here as a independent individual tonight.
Well, do you have any comments as an independent individual and thoughts on permit systems and?
Really challenging to implement.
Local landowners.
Yeah.
The Land Water Conservation Act, both for Green State Parks covered by WCF, which changes how you can limit access.
So for those of you on Zoom, I don't know if you can hear the conversation in the room, but it's about the challenges to a permit system stemming from multiple landowners for the access points, whether it's also state agency, federal agency, and then what did Miles say? Oh, the multiple access points and kind of how you would actually enforce or implement something like that.
What were you saying about the Land and Water Conservation Act? I didn't quite.
It's just something to consider.
Yeah.
If you're trying to limit the number of people who can access an area that is protected by the Land and Water Conservation Act.
Okay.
Because I don't know enough about what it does. Because does that then mean you can't limit the number of people because it's being conserved for people to use? I guess.
Miles.
Okay. Right. No, I just was trying to understand.
See, I don't work for any government agencies, so I can say whatever.
Things you complicated, you start eliminating folks, or
Yeah.
as you said, it's different in the national park than this year, or the entirety of Active State Park, you have to come in through one access point.
Right.
Just have multiple landowners in the area, multiple trail routes.
Yeah.
And various funding sources guaranteeing access.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the short answer is that it's a very complicated, you know, question. And I'd also throw in there culture, because in New Hampshire, we're just not used to being restricted. You know, live free or die, right? So you know, there never has been in the White Mountains any restricted access before. So
there is one
that I know of.
comment in the chat that says the Great Gulf Wilderness used to limit to 60 people a day back in the 70s. That was
Wow,
very limited access.
and that stopped. I wonder why that didn't continue. I didn't know that. So,
I don't know. So something.
but it's something that, I mean, definitely figuring out ways to limit the numbers of people on Franconia Ridge is important, whether that's done through, you know, little tricks like shuttle systems and parking, or whether it's done through, you know, administrative actions like permit systems. That all has to be looked at, but we are reaching some limits.
Or advertising other routes.
What?
Or advertising other trails.
Well, actually, one of the, if you read the forest plan, the policy is that you do not try, in order to solve an overuse problem, you don't push it on some other area. Now, what?
Solution is not a solution.
Right.
But
Right.
if it does flatten out the wave, right, if not.
I would actually argue,
Yeah, not
so this,
hears about, because partly people are coming because they hear that's the best hike to do,
yeah,
right? And I don't know how, like, do people hear that through word of mouth? Is it just you know, now you go to Google and you just read the same blogs over and over again? I don't really know. There's so many incredible hikes that you can do that I think people don't know about.
I think it's worth looking at this issue and not just, you know, automatically saying we're not going to have a policy to, you know, that will take people off of a high use area and put them on a lower use area. I mentioned that, you know, Andras from Hungary he's a mathematician, is working on looking at how, if you design some additional loops, you know, so for example, there are a lot of people that shouldn't be hiking the Franconia Ridge and start hiking it and then sort of get stuck. They're beginner hikers or intermediate hikers. If there was a way that they could go to Cloudland Falls and perhaps loop back, the terrain is pretty difficult, but if you created some smaller loops, or maybe another loop between the Greenleaf Trail and the old bridle path, you could start having flows of people that could potentially get people who shouldn't be on the ridge off the ridge, but also have not the back and forth traffic on Cloudland Falls that you have, and potentially a loop. So there's ways that you can design trail systems that will distribute people better. And I think that we should be looking at that.
No, this is.
We get too excited about trails. I know most people don't.
Yeah, well, that's why we had you come. I couldn't talk with any authority about trails, so that's how this works.
Andy?
Entertaining here. Can you go back to that final slide you had?
Yeah.
If possible. I just want to point out, you don't know this is in Zoom, but the second person from the far left here. So this is like a tiny spot of mud on my knee. This is all mud. This awesome volunteer came out in the area of Faro all day digging, you know, chest deep to get that mineral soil out of some of the bedrock and some of the root areas to pave our new section of trail. So.
Were those volunteers who had volunteered before, or were some of them brand new?
A couple in this group were returners, and some of them are you know, they live for trails in their own words. But some of them just started online, but random, completely mix of folks.
Are you familiar with the Waterloo National Area?
With the what?
Waterloo natural area in Plymouth?
I am not.
Oh, okay, it's right here in Plymouth, and I'm working on it. I'm on the Conservation Commission, so I've been on it from the beginning, but that's another trail that's being knocked to death.
Yeah.
And so this Saturday, I'm gonna be out there with the trail work. But
Oh, that's great.
if you haven't been there, you know, it's really.
I should I'd like to go there, but only if I'm not gonna.
Make it worse.
Make it worse.
Just don't go on Saturday.
Yeah.
And it's
So there-
only
How are we doing for
1.9 miles.
over 120 people days and OB?
Design a system meant for the load, I think is the.
The Walter Newton area has a 30-foot waterfall.
What is the over 120 people days?
Old bridle path.
Old Bridle Path, I'm just wondering what that. Oh, that's Robert White. Bob. Bob. No, Bob is our project manager for the World Trails Network on the, he's the one who should be here.
It says to look at Arcadia for a model. So what are they doing at Arcadia?
Do you know more
Okay.
about Acadia? I'm not as familiar with Acadia.
I was gonna say, does Bob wanna unmute and tell
Bob,
us
you want
about
to unmute
Acadia?
and say something?
Yes, please, yes. I think-
Uh-oh, now we're in trouble.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I'm over in Intervale, in Repose, but it's, Nat's done a super nice job. Yeah, I mean, you know, I come at trails through the lens of being a landscape architect. And, you know, the first comprehensive trails, designed anywhere in America, in terms of an actual plan was Central Park in New York City. And what they did there, and this is, I believe, really an actual sort of a timeless hierarchy of trails, was they had different kinds of trails and carriage roads and walking paths and bridle paths for different uses in sort of a mosaic of that they could take the trails and put them in to match them to the topography, and also allow people to move in different ways, you know, through a landscape. So the relevance of Acadia is that many of the people actually who were part of Central Park, you know, 50 years later or 70 years later, were a part of designing many of the village trails, the carriage roads, and the whole network of a trail system at Acadia, which pretty much mirrors that. And so they have many flavors of trails over there. There are carriage roads that are built and used by millions and millions of people, but because they're so well built and they're built at a high level, is people can ride bikes on them, they can ride their horse on them, they can they can have a baby stroller on it, and they don't really cause, you know, other than their initial construction, which was, you know, took some work, took a lot of work, you know, it was done during the Depression. There were hundreds and hundreds of laborers were hired to work there, many that were skilled craftspeople. So anyway, so you have a high level trail in certain areas that brings people through and, you know, and allows them to move through the landscape. And I think Acadia has, in the national park, there's over 60 miles of carriage roads that people can have there, you know, have access to amazing areas in a relatively easy and graceful and sustainable way, because they really don't cause impacts, kind of like what you see on Franconia Ridge. So you could have as many people, you know, 1,000 or more people using a higher level trail, and there's really no impact to it at all because it's built generously and accommodating. At the same time as you have other trails at Acadia that are more of a hiking style, and then there's some that are really kind of in between, more of a walking style. And so they allow people to pick and choose the kind of trail, the kind of landscape they want to go through. And then there are some trails that are just very lightly used. And they're really these sort of almost secret trails, like the little, like neighborhood trails, things like that, where you can walk up a mossy waterfall and pretty much not see anyone all day. People talk about Acadia having millions of people. I have hiked all day at Acadia on some of the more remote trails and not seen a single person all day long, except when you literally get back to the trailhead. So we don't have a system like that in the White Mountains, except perhaps of the trails that were sort of inherited from the logging railroad eras. You could say that that could be or could have been a platform for more of a hierarchy kind of trails, but they were built as logging railroads, and they knew they'd go in there and then they'd come back out. So the perpetuity of some of those logging railroad routes, particularly into the Pemi, they've turned into beaver dams, and they are no longer the nice flat sort of accessible that they used to be. Now they're all basically, our trails are either straight up eroded rubble piles, cattywampus as Nat calls it, or they're basically mucky troughs that people have to slog their way through. I look at the pictures of what people are hiking on, in the 4,000 footer like Facebook page, and I just look and I just say, oh, there are so many trails that need so much work. But a lot of it is because we didn't really design an intentional system of trails, and we didn't know anything really in the back. I mean, the Greenleaf Trail is going to be 200 years old in 2 years, and the old bridle path is like 175 years old. Crawford Path is 200 years old. So we didn't really know what it meant to design a sustainable trail then. All they wanted to do was get to the top. And and they basically went straight up the mountain. So every one of those in a particularly a summer like this turns into a raging river in the middle of a thunderstorm, or a sustained week long of pouring rain. So we don't have an intentional system. We have a system that we inherited from history that really didn't know how to do trails other than just forging a path through the woods. So I use Acadia. That's my sort of ultimate model, because it's very democratic and an open system. There are lots of access points. There is no intention of limiting use on trails there, but they've actually built a trail with levels of trail development that accommodate a real spectrum of people to be able to use it.
Thanks. Yeah. You want to add anything to that or wrap up? We're just about, if not past out of time, but.
No, I mean, I think these poor people here need to go.
Yeah, they need some supper. Okay.
Thank you, Bob, for that comment.
And
As I said, Bob works with us as the project manager for the World Trails Network on the Old Bridle Path. And he's a landscape architect, has a really good eye for the trail work.
great. Well, thank you all for coming in person. Thank you for coming on Zoom, and thank you for your